Hey, good. Good morning. All right, we'll go ahead and start with some review questions. You can turn to Genesis chapter 50. We'll start with Joseph. Yes. Yeah. We're trying to dust off go into the back recesses of our minds here and remember. Yeah. All right, so what was Joseph's request of his brothers when he was near death? Yes. Yeah. So take his bones back and bury them in the promised land. Very good. How did Jacob show that his favorite son was Joseph? Yep, the coat. The coat of many colors, yes. All right. Sorry, I switched. No. All right, so now in Genesis 37, describe Joseph's two dreams. I don't need all the details, but give me something you remember about the two dreams.
The sheaves of wheat.
Okay, sheaves of wheat. The moon, stars, and sun. And they're all bowing down, and that's what gets everybody in a stir. All right. Now we're going to switch to Daniel. So go over to Daniel 6. How often did Daniel pray and give thanks to God? 3 times a day. All right. So I guess that was short on Daniel. Now we're going to go to Jesus. All right. Mark chapter 2. How did Jesus prove to those present at the healing of the paralytic that he could forgive sins? Yep, by healing him. Yep, very good. Jesus spoke of himself as being equal with who? John 5:18. God. All right. Jesus told of a time when those who did good deeds would be resurrected to what? And this is in John chapter 5. Resurrected to John 5:29. Uh-huh. Oh. Did I put the wrong verse down? Oh, okay. All right. So the question again was, so Jesus spoke of a time that those who do good deeds will be resurrected to what? Yeah, to live, to life. And then who will be the judge? Who will be the judge? Jesus. Yep. Which that actually, when I was going through these review questions, I was like, oh, Jesus is the judge? I thought that was God the Father. But that they're kind of, but again, I mean, we're talking about the Trinity. I don't know how that all works anyway. So anyway, yeah.
And that gets me too, because when I pray,
Yeah.
I think we pray to Jesus, right? Well, God.
Yeah.
See?
Yep. I know.
Am I taking this a little further than I should? I mean, do we pray to Jesus? Do we pray to God? I know I don't pray to the Holy Spirit, but I'm just like they're all the same, right?
I mean,
See?
yes. I mean, this is a great question for Mark's lesson on Wednesdays. But yes, we can cover that. But yes, they're all God. You know, they all have the characteristics of God. But I would say that they have different functions or different, they have different, is that right? Different roles? I don't know. But it's probably a discussion that we could go into in a longer format, but I think there is at least one example that I can think of that you could argue is an example of somebody praying to Jesus.
Well, that's just what Elaine said. Pray to the Father in my name. All that is spoken, we say it in his.
Right, right, right. And you could also argue that, like, Jesus set the example for us to pray to the Father, because he didn't pray to himself. That would be kind of interesting.
Ask anything in my name.
Right. And then you can also look at scriptures that show that, again, the way that the Trinity, how each person in the Trinity is doing something, like in Jesus' name, or he's our advocate, and then we have the Spirit that's helping us. There's times we just don't know the words to say, and the Spirit's there to help kind of translate that, if you will. I don't know a better word. So then you've got all the pieces, all the people involved. I don't know.
The way I look at it is Jesus is my Father.
So hard to talk about. Yeah. Yep. All right. So according to Jesus, had the Jews ever seen God or heard his voice? No. At least in this particular part, when he's talking, he said no, they hadn't. This is in John, still, John 5, I believe. I didn't specifically write that one down, but I'm pretty sure it's in John. Who did Jesus say is Lord of the Sabbath? He is, yes. Why did the Pharisees want Jesus to heal the man with the withered hand? This was something I had missed when I was even reading through it.
Wasn't that doing work on Sunday?
Yeah, they actually wanted him to heal the man, not to help the man, but so that then they could have something to, trap him with. So I had missed that. So yes. How did Jesus feel towards the Pharisees about this situation? Jesus got what with them? Angry. Yeah, he got angry with them. How many apostles did Jesus choose? 12. Okay. All right. Now we're going back to, I guess it would be last Sunday, to Adam and creation. What did God do to create light? He spoke. Was God alone at creation? No. And man was created in the likeness of yes, in God's image, in our image. Very good. All right. Now you can go ahead and open, if you're not already there, to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. So Genesis chapter 2 starts off with the first 3 verses here, talking about how God rested from his creation, from his work. Something that I found interesting when looking into this, the word rested here, obviously God wasn't tired, right? So we should emphasize that. The God we serve doesn't get tired. Maybe a better word was he refrained from creating, or he ceased creating. He was done creating. But we do have an example here that God sets for us, that he did his creating, and then on the 7th day he, rested, he stopped creating, and he made it holy, he made it special, which this is even before, all the Sabbath laws would come later. And someone that I was, reading in preparation for this pointed out how that helps us, it gives us this example of we don't have to be doing stuff. We don't have to be productive all the time. We can have times to rest. We can have times where we're not producing and making, and it's okay. God has said, it's good. He did that, and he set that, I'm sure, for our example, right? Because he didn't need to do it, but he did it for us. So I thought that was a really good point here with this verse that, we don't, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm resting, I should be up doing something, and you start feeling bad, but there is a certain amount of balance there where yes, you get your stuff done, but you also need time to, recharge. So that's the first observation I had in the first few verses there. Then in verse 4, we have this phrase, generations of heaven and earth. You will see this if you're interested. Go home online and you search in Genesis for that phrase, generations. You'll see some of these recurring sections that come up. These are the generations of, for example, Noah, or these are the generations of the sons of Noah. So this is one of the ways you can kind of break down or organize the book of Genesis, is by these smaller generation groups. And it almost seems like, Moses, when he was writing this, kind of used that to break it up. So just another little observation I hadn't noticed before. I don't really have an application to that, but it helps kind of to understand how Genesis is organized. All right, verse 7. So now we're in this section where we get a zoomed in view of creation. Chapter 1 was the, kind of the overview, broad strokes of what happened, and now we're zooming in to see more detail about some of the details of how God created, and specifically here about mankind or man. So in verse 7, the thing that I wanted to focus on was, then the Lord God formed man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So, formed here, I've heard that it was, that it was pointed out here, like God's doing something special here. He's forming, taking extra care for creating man, right? Different than some of the other creatures he created. I'm not really sure that that's the case, though. So I'm going to throw out maybe an alternate idea here, because if you drop down to verse 19, the same Hebrew word is used to describe how he creates every beast of the field. Notice that it says, out of the ground the Lord formed. And based on what I could figure out, that is actually the same Hebrew word. So at least that part of it isn't what makes us different from the rest of, the animals. Okay? So that's, my first point. And then you would say, well, maybe it's going back to verse 7, maybe it's the fact that he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Maybe that's what it is. Again, I don't think that's it either, because if you look at, and then this is just one example, if you go to Genesis chapter 7 and verse 22, it states, and this is in regards to around, the flood and stuff, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. So again, I don't think that that phrasing is necessarily what makes humans different than any other, in today's, I think we would just describe it as, they're animals that breathe, right? We breathe. So, I don't know. I just threw that out because at times you may run across that where, we can go to verses that talk about how we are unique. And even here in Genesis, maybe we should do that now. It talks about, because we didn't get a chance to do that last week. We ran out of time. But if you flip back to chapter 1, I think that's when it says that, chapter 1, verse 26, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So one of the ideas that I saw, they suggested that perhaps what makes us in the image of God is the fact that God gave us, authority over his creation. At least that's one aspect. Obviously, we have a, soul, and we can look at those verses maybe some other time. But here, his point was that in this verse, the connection here about being in, God's likeness or image is related to that, like, authority. He's given us authority over creation. So, anyway, you guys have any thoughts on that? I don't really think there's much application other than just understanding how, we're made, how God made us special, but not necessarily verse 7 of chapter 2. I don't think that's what the point was there. Okay. All righty. Now, let's see. Oh, this is a good one. All right. Verse 15. Flip to 15. Then the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. Or some translations will say work, right? Work it. But this is before the fall, right? Before sin. What? There was work in the Garden of Eden? Yeah. So I think the point is that work isn't necessarily a bad thing. I was in one of our men's retreat a while back. The speaker made a point. Now, this is his opinion, and he said that, but I thought it was an interesting idea. He suggested that there might be work in heaven. We might have jobs in heaven because here, before sin, God gave man a job to do. He was to take care of the garden that was created for him. So, now obviously we'll see in a minute that work has gotten harder. But I thought that was an interesting observation that there was work before we sinned, before the fall, and God intended for us to work. And then, as I stated before, and to have time of rest too. But any thoughts on that? Comments? Okay. Now, verse 18. I believe, and I should have spent the time, but maybe you guys can help me remember. In verse 18, I think this is the first time we have recorded that something's not good. So if you guys can find that, let me know. But for now, we're going to go with it, that this is the first place that God states that it's not good for man to be alone. And so what unfolds is God brings all the, animals, and Adam names them. I guess to really emphasize to Adam that there was nothing out there for him, and then that's why God needed to create something specially designed to be that helper, to meet that need for man. And so we know the story. God puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes a rib out of his side, and creates woman. So a couple of observations here. I like the analogy or the connection between the fact that God used a rib, not like something from the foot. It, I think, indicates how that it's, we're in it together, helping side by side, right? So, so there's that. One of the books that I read in the past was called Cherish, and it's by Gary Thomas. I recommend it if you guys are interested. It's about, marriage, and one of the one of the statements that he makes, or one of the encouragements that he makes to husbands, is that we should treat our wives as if they're Eve. And his point is that when Adam meets Eve, there are no other comparisons. She is woman. There's no glamour magazines or TV shows or the media bombarding Adam to say, this is how a woman should look. No, Adam met Eve. Eve was Eve. She was his woman. So back to the book. So Gary is making the point that once men as husbands, once we are married, our wife is Eve to us. There is no other woman on earth to us except our wife. There are no comparisons. I thought that was a really powerful point, that it takes so much of the other stuff out of the way. So that is my challenge to all of us husbands here, is to treat our wives as if they are Eve. They are the woman to us. There are no other women. There are no other comparisons. They define what a woman is to us. What do you guys think? Thoughts? Boy, I'm doing a lot of talking this morning. I know, I didn't either. Yeah.
That doesn't take the women off the hook. I mean, we need to be that for them. So they can think that of us, but we put in the work too.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by, can you define, like what work? What
If we want them to see us that way, then we need to treat them well too.
I see. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Jen?
I mean, women in our culture are bombarded with messages that we're not enough. Your personality's not right, your body's not right, your hair's not right, your wrinkles aren't right, your teeth aren't right, none of you's right.
right? Like, what? You're getting older? Oh, you got to stop that. Like, stop that at all costs. You're getting older.
Children and then look like you had children.
Right. Yep.
Okay, and so it's a wonderful gift you can give your wife to be like, you're a woman. You don't need to look like any of these other
Right.
people who spend their entire life trying to look like something they're not.
Right. Right.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the behavior too.
Yeah, I
but
didn't mean like
yeah,
just the.
that's-
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Matter of respect. Yep. It is. It is. And that respect is both ways. Like, how does the husband show respect to their wife, and then how does the wife, show respect to their husband? Exactly. I think that's a good word. And then I guess his word, again, and going back to the book, his word was, the husbands we cherish. He picked cherish because he felt like love was like, I don't know, he'd gotten, he needed a new word so then he could describe it. But, yep. All right. So now we can, that's perfect segue to marriage here in verse 24. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So, what is the reason here, guys? For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother. Is it pointing back to because it wasn't good for man to be alone? Verse 24, it talks about for this reason. I was just curious what that's referring back to. Is it talking about the fact that man and woman, woman was bone of, I guess maybe referring back to verse 23, the man said, Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Maybe that's why. So marriage is the first institution set up by God. I think it's sometimes easy to forget that. We think of some of the other ones. You think of the law of Moses given and the chosen people, but before that it was marriage early on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yes. And then this emphasizes the importance, of how that we are our own, family units. We have to, move on. And then this, I think, fits with some of the other verses that talk about, be fruitful and multiply that as well. I wanted to take this time to flip over to Matthew chapter 19 because this is where at least one of the verses that shows where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, and Jesus is quoting this verse and discussing about marriage. So Matthew chapter 19. All right, so some Pharisees come to Jesus, testing him, asking him, is it lawful for a man, sorry, I'm in verse 3. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? And he answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Okay, so here Jesus is quoting this verse, emphasizing the importance of marriage, how that it's, it's that too, yes, and that it's for life, yep. And then they go on, they're like, but, why then did Moses give us, the certificate of divorce, that kind of thing? And he said to them, because of your hardness of hearts, Moses permitted it, but from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Now, I think it's important to keep reading here and see how the disciples react. The disciples said to him, if the relationship of the man with his wife is like this, it is better not to marry. I thought that was an interesting observation. But Jesus said, he doesn't change his statement. He says, not all men can accept this statement, and only those to whom it has been given. So he goes on to explain basically, like, if you can't accept this, don't get married, is my, Landon's summary of this. Right? If you can't handle it. But again, Jesus doesn't change his thoughts on that. So, again, I guess my emphasis is that, marriage was put in place by God early for a reason. And Jesus emphasizes when he was here the importance of it. And we should do the same. Yep. That's a whole nother discussion, right? Yep. So that's what I had for chapter 2 of Genesis. Do you guys have any comments over anything from chapter 2? All right, let's keep going then, and we'll spend the rest of the time on chapter 3. You can't talk about chapter 3 without at least mentioning the fact that there was at least nothing recorded that Eve was surprised that the serpent talked. I always thought that was interesting. And said to the woman, indeed, God has said, And the woman said, I either it's just not recorded because it wasn't necessary, or I don't know. I don't know what, but so that was just one of those things that I noticed. There's nothing really more that I had about that. So verse 6. I wish I could remember who it was that pointed this out to me, but I've always liked it, so I'm going to share it with you. So here in verse 6, you see kind of the thought process of how Eve is, what is Eve thinking when she's considering what the serpent said? When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and then it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, then she, ate. So the person made this connection over in 1 John chapter 2. So if you can kind of put a bookmark in Genesis 2 or Genesis 3, and then flip over to 1 John. Specifically, the context is 1 John 15 through 17, but specifically verse 16. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. Okay, so the person then said, that you can connect each one of these things in 1 John to what happened here in Genesis chapter 3. So I thought that was pretty interesting and useful, that these are the kind of things that Satan is using against us, right? So you can see Eve noticed, ooh, that's good for food. And then that would line up with 1 John, where it's talking about the desires of the flesh. Then you've got Eve, notice it was delight to the eyes. Well, that lines up with desires of the eye. And then, I don't know, this one's a little, I'm not so sure, but I guess it makes, making one wise, I guess that could kind of line up with pride of life, because you want to be wise while you're living. Yeah.
Usually isn't wisdom gained by making mistakes and causing sin, but repenting
Uh-huh.
and unfortunately learning the wrong things in life.
Yes, that's true. That is how wisdom, sometimes you have to gain wisdom the hard way, right? And so maybe here she's trying to gain that wisdom through a shortcut, obviously, but that would line up, at least according to this analogy, it would line up, or this connection would be pride of life here in 1 John 2. What do you guys think? Is that helpful to you too? I always thought it was interesting when I heard it. And again, these are the kind of areas that Satan is attacking us, right? Yeah.
Just making Eve like, well, I'm not gonna let God tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go eat that apple.
Mm-hmm.
Give it to Adam, nobody's gonna tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how long women are now.
Well, I mean, but this is a good example of, yeah, sin. If sin weren't like appealing, would we sin? That's kind of almost part of the definition of sin. There's like something there that we desire, right? So we have to admit up front that there is something like in this verse, there's something good about it, like that we think is good, right? So we have to, when we're being tempted, we have to remember the question isn't whether it's going to be good, fun, exciting, whatever words you want to use. The question is, what did God say? Right. What does God say? And then I've also, in one of the books I've read, they made the point that really when it comes down to these kind of temptation kind of discussions, when you're having that inner tug, you got to remember that in some ways there is no question. God's already made the statement, so there isn't any kind of discussion that needs to be had, right? He's already said you shouldn't eat of the tree, so we don't even need to discuss this. God's already answered that. God's already taken care of it. So we don't need to be battling with ourselves. Nope. God's already answered that. So
That's why I quit smoking. Seriously, that's why I quit smoking.
what do you mean?
I battled with it for
Uh-huh.
a while, and I baptized and everything, and just battled with it, and I thought, no, it's not bad. But then I realized what I was doing was going against God and how He wanted me as a whole with my body, and it was that easy. I just, okay.
You're
I
just,
knew it was something He wanted me to do, and I stopped
and you just,
immediately.
because you had decided and you were like, yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I knew it was something.
Mm-hmm. Mark?
Four words in that verse that always hit me is, who was with her?
Mm.
Because a lot of times we tell that story like it's a solo sin.
Uh-huh.
It's all Eve, and
Right.
he was there
Yes. Yes.
That's why later, when Paul talks about how sin came into the world, he'll say through one man. He didn't say through one woman.
Mm,
So he was there, he was a full participant. They're one flesh, they're human.
right.
He could have stopped it, just like she could have stopped it.
Right. That's a really good observation that you're talking about right there at the end of that verse where she gave also to her husband with her. You know, he was there with her. Yeah. That's a great point. Great point.
We shouldn't be surprised when we recognize Satan has come for our families. Satan went for the family first,
Mm,
and the rest,
that's a good point.
you know,
That's a good point.
family is kind of Satan's enemy.
That's a great point. Yes. So Satan's attacking the family. Family is, well, that goes back to even, God set up family so early. I mean, it's the foundational building blocks of everything else, right? Yeah. Yeah. Jen?
I was thinking about the comment you made about we shouldn't have to have extra discussion about things that God has said. Like, so for us, that's what's in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought very quickly of many examples of how we do that, where it's like teachings about divorce, teachings about homosexuality, teachings about women leadership in the church. Well, should we do this? Well, was that cultural? Well, God wouldn't want me to be sad. But that's, it's written down, like,
Mm-hmm.
word for word. So when you start bringing those extra things into discussion, like the snake was like, no, God, you won't really die.
You
I mean,
won't,
he also
sure.
lies to Eve about it, but she swallows the lie quickly because she likes what she's hearing and wants to go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
be sure we're not lying to ourselves in those discussions about God's nature and the teachings of the
Right. Right. Lying to ourselves about those discussions or lying to ourselves about what is up for discussion, right? Like in some ways, like once we've discussed it and figured out what God's will is, then that's God's will, and we can just say, well, Satan, God's decided, right? Yeah. Right. Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yep. It is. Right. Yeah. It's a battle with ourselves between what I want versus what God wants. Right? Like, yeah. There you go. Yeah. Right. Yes.
Because she was even talking about, the magazines that always say, oh, you need this to make yourself more desirable, you need
Right.
that, or whatever it is out there. What does God say is most important?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we always are up against on a daily basis in this world.
Right. Is what does God say is important versus what the world says is important, and who are we going to listen to?
We can easily
Right.
quiet the Holy Spirit when he is nudging our hearts, because we're like, no.
That's a great point. Right. Right. Yep. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I'll just leave you with one thing as you go. After they sinned, what did they do? They started blaming other people, right? So our takeaway for that, and that's what I'm leaving with you, is that blaming others doesn't get us out of trouble, out of consequences. So anyway, thank you for your comments.